Life is about moments and triggers, and I liken it to dealing with an opponent. So when you hop in the ring, you have to make adjustments.
Welcome to a very special edition episode of the Game Changing Attorney Podcast, featuring some of the most elite athletes on the planet.
So you have to prepare. You have to do things that other people aren't willing to do. Because when you go in that ring, you have to tell yourself, I may lose this fight, but I'm not going to lose this fight because I wasn't in condition.
I'm Michael Mogill, founder and CEO of CRISP, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. CRISP started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer. Today, we're revisiting one of our most popular episodes from the podcast where I sat down with podcast guests who have redefined the limits of performance. As you'll soon see, the mindsets and habits of these elite-level performers reveal lessons that are applicable not just in the world of sports, but also in the world of business. From the mindsets required to perform under pressure to what it takes to maintain a competitive edge, this episode is for those who play to win.
No matter where you are, what you're doing, if you're broken, you're defeated, you can get up and do one more. And I don't know how many times you're going to have to get up and do one more. And sometimes you're going to have to get up and do one more alone. But I promise you can do it.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney Podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I want to remind you that we aren't beholden to any sponsors or run any ads on this podcast. This allows us to present all of our episodes raw and unfiltered. I'm not going to push any made-to-order meal services on you or try to save you any money on your car insurance. That being said, I have one small request. If you receive any value from this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. Pay the fee so we can keep this podcast free. To kick things off, we revisit our conversation with George Foreman III, undefeated pro boxer who retired with a perfect 16-0 record, trainer, fearless entrepreneur, and yes, son of 2-time heavyweight champion George Foreman. While many believe that his athletic career was a planned legacy, George actually had a different type of motivation to step into the ring.
I never felt any pressure to be a fighter. I was just always curious about it. It's a fun sport. I grew up working in training camps, counting rounds, tying shoes, carrying the axe, sharpening the axe, driving behind my dad doing road work. Training camp was a job. And so never did it myself until I was in my mid-20s. But I remember Lennox Lewis, who's a professional boxer, retired legend. I used to go to all the HBO fights and sit ringside. When my father was commentating, I was standing up as Lennox was walking into the ring, and he walked past me. And I looked at him, and I was like, he's not that big. So that was moment number one. Moment number two is Lennox Lewis's trainer, a guy named Emmanuel Stewart. He trained guys like Tommy Hearns, Vladimir Klitschko, and a bunch of other legendary fighters. He would see me at the lead-up events and in the green room and all that. And he said, George, he told me that, George, let me have him. I can make a great champ out of him. Like, look, you'd make a great champ. And he was joking, now that I know how hard boxing is, but I believed him, right? And so I ballooned up to 300 pounds and I needed to get in shape. And I always wanted to do something. And my brothers teased me. Like, I played lacrosse. I was on varsity, but I wasn't the best. I played basketball. Wasn't the best. I didn't start at basketball. Played football. Started sometime when they felt bad for me. But I could do anything one-on-one really well. But I couldn't play team sports that well, like running plays and all that. And so I was in my mid-20s, had been working for my dad, managing him for almost 5 years at the time, gained a lot of weight, wanted to lose weight. And I was like, let me try something new as a way to motivate me to get in shape. I'll try boxing. And I called my brothers up, and they've been teasing me, saying that there's no proof that you were ever a varsity athlete. That was actually a big motivator for me to box. Because I went to boarding school. They were like, well, no one's ever seen you play sports, so there's no proof you don't have like a Letterman's jacket or whatever. So they do that at the school I went to. They give you a sweater. So I said, look, guys, if I have one amateur boxing match, will you guys shut up? That's how it started. And they agreed. And I won't carry it through the rest of the story, but eventually I lost 80 pounds, committed to have an amateur boxing match. And then my dad stopped me and said, let me train you for 6 weeks, which turned into a year and another 5 years. So that's kind of how I got into it.
Why do you think he said that? Why do you think he pulled you aside and said, let me train you?
At the time I was his business manager, we were traveling. We were at the Crystal Cathedral. He was doing a speaking for the minister there. And I was telling him like, I want to fight. And he actually was helping me trying to make sure I'm matched with somebody that we know. We don't just show up at a random guys. Other amateurs wouldn't fight me because typically when you have 0 fights, you fight someone else's 0 fights. And they're like, why in the world in Houston, where we're all from, would I have my fighter's first fight be against George Foreman's kid? Just doesn't make sense. I couldn't fight a lick. I still can't fight that good. So then he was like, well, why don't you have a pro fight? Because at least you know the person's actually going to show up for the check. So I was like, cool. And he was like, okay, well, if you're going to fight pro, you got to let me train you. I was like, all right. He said, we're going to train for 6 weeks and you're going to have your fight and then it's going to be over. 6 weeks turned into 6 weeks and it just kept on going. I do remember my mother was scared and she was like, you got to go down there and check on him. Once he influenced me to have that fight, he didn't want to be the reason I got hurt. And so he was like, I got to watch him. And then I can tell you for sure we were having fun. That's why 6 weeks turned into a year of training before my first fight. I think he enjoyed it because he loved the sport. He never, by the way, sat down and like had a meeting about it. And he was like, yeah, let me train you for this first one. And then we just like woke up and it was like a year later, I had my first fight. He's about to shoot an infomercial with the Harringtons, Kevin Harrington and his brother. And I was telling him about the script and he was like, don't worry about that. Worry about your next fight. And I was like, there's your next fight? And he was like, yep, next month. And I was like, okay. And I just went home and ate food and like started training for another fight. There was no discussion.
And George, I'd love for you to talk about what that training was like, because obviously with your father, it seems like it's either going to be the best or nothing. And it wasn't just let's go lift some weights and let's go do some cardio. A lot of what I heard about that training, it's almost like the Rocky type training. A lot of it physical, but also mental as well.
It was all mental. You can't tap the mental unless you have driven the physical past what's appropriate. Then you tap into the mental, right? Everything else is just being lazy or like concerned that you're going to hurt yourself and all that, which is healthy. You should be. But when we're trying to train the brain, you got to push the body to a place where, assuming you're hydrated, assuming you're rested, assuming you're in a safe place, maybe someone knows where you're at or observing you, you push the body to a place where you can only move forward with the mind. And so that's what it was all about. So the first thing was run 10 miles. And he kept asking me, like, I'm not going to touch you. I'm not going to teach you anything until you run 10 miles. And I eventually had to do that with no preparation. He kept asking me, and I had just been sitting on the recumbent bike. We were traveling a lot. It was like, you know what? Let's just go do it tomorrow. And he was like, do you have boots? I was like, nope. And he went and found a size 13 and a half pair of boots at Famous Footwear. I was a size 14, almost 15. And he was like, let's go. He's like, I'll let you start off slow, but you cannot walk. And around mile 7, I never run more than 3 miles. Mile 7, took off. He was behind me in a buggy and he was like, don't let your feet hit the front of this thing. And I took off for a mile. To this day, I don't know how in the world I did that. That was this. The body wasn't prepared for that. I wasn't doing anything. And then I recovered while jogging and then finished another 3 miles and did not realize that my heels were full on gushing, bleeding outside the boots and everything until the end. The mind. The way he would explain it is, I'm trying to put an ingredient in your brain that you're going to need, because when you get to round 10, round 11, round 12, the body's tapped out. The mind takes over, and we're trying to train your brain on how to do that and feel comfortable in that space. And I could tell you more and more about some of the challenges, but it was all about how do we build mentally this expectation that the body is not going to carry us there.
And George, I know you're a humble guy, but I want to make sure that the people listening to this podcast know that your professional record was 16-0, 15 knockouts, 1 decision, but 0 losses, 0 draws. I'd love to know just kind of like what you learned from that experience, basically retiring undefeated.
During preparation, take your losses there. You're going to have competition that you thought was going to be hard. My first fight, I didn't see the guy until we walked in, and my dad was like, he's going to do this to you, he's going to do that to you, and you got to watch out for this. Like, he was nothing. I mean, as a fighter, he's a great human being. But about 4 or 5 guys where I was so afraid of them, and apparently they didn't stand a really chance. And I fought a few guys I wasn't afraid of, and they almost knocked me out. One guy knocked me down, but they didn't call it a knockdown because I slipped at the same time he hit me. Then another guy fully knocked me down, and I didn't expect it. So my point is, I won those fights, but the reason I won those fights is because I took my losses in the gym. I took my losses in the morning when I was running. All my losses were in preparation, and the more I took my losses there, I feel like the more likely that I was prepared for the stuff you can't prepare for, right? You have to make adjustments, but you need confidence to make adjustments. So I'd say that's what it was all about.
And through your experience, because I know there's a lot of principles that you took from boxing that ultimately you also applied in building a business, and you saw even many of the students that you taught and mentored. What were some of those? What were some of the things that you felt that applied in the boxing ring that also applied in life and even entrepreneurship?
Life is about moments and triggers. It's about moments, instances. Boxing is very much like that. And I liken it to dealing with an opponent. So when you hop in the ring, especially if you're evenly matched, you can't just go out there and just do what you got to do. You have to make adjustments. Just like optimizing a website or optimizing your digital strategy. You tried this, didn't work, but you did an A/B test, or you ran this subject line in an email against 20% of your list and the other one against another 20% of your list. You picked the winner and ran that against the other 60%. That's what a fight's like. But you have to be prepared and have the knowledge to make those adjustments. Try this. If this doesn't work, I try this. Why did that work? All right, let me tweak that. Let me pull back. I'm a little too close. I'm a little too far. I think he was tired. Maybe he isn't tired. Let me try to figure out if he's tired. He is tired. Okay, well, I'm not going to sit on my stool. The whole preparation before the fight, even before the fight starts, is you're making adjustments based on every interaction with the person you're fighting. So I think that can be applied to anything, even you, making adjustments against your own silliness. So I think, how do you prepare to make adjustments? Fatigue cannot be a thing. You have to prepare. Stamina is a boxing term. So you have to prepare. You have to do things that other people aren't willing to do. Because when you go in that ring, you have to tell yourself, I may lose this fight, but I'm not going to lose this fight because I wasn't in condition, or because this person is in better condition than me. We're not going to lose it because we're tired. Let's take that off. We're not going to lose this fight because we got knocked out. There are ways to strengthen your body. It's a little thing called the posterior chain in your core and all these little things. And then defense, so that you don't lose the fight because you couldn't defend yourself or you couldn't get back up. So that takes this little thing called resilience. Like, you can prepare for that. You can prepare for that mentally. You can prepare for that physically. So that has to be taken off the table. Stamina, then I need resilience, right? Thinking ability is very much about recovery. You have stamina, which is like, how long can I sustain what I'm doing? Recovery is, how often can I exert myself and then recover, and then exert myself and recover, and exert myself and recover. If you can do that, then you can be really aggressive, try different things, recover, try something else, recover, try something else. So I think it's all these things. I think in life, it just could not be more similar. In boxing, if you can do those things, if you can have a great defense to make sure I can protect myself at all times. Maybe I can't land a punch, but I can protect myself at all times. You can stay in the fight for 12 rounds. And so I think the ability to not get tired, to recover when you try things that maybe didn't work or get the knockout, the ability to be resilient, to get up off the canvas if someone knocks you down, all these things give you this ever so precious thing that Floyd Mayweather has it in the ring. I'm not talking about him as an individual. That's none of my business. Muhammad Ali had this. I think my dad had it. He would say he did. Sugar Ray Robinson had it. Michael Jordan had it. LeBron James had it. Kobe. It's a privilege. Thinking ability. And I don't care how smart you are or how intelligent you are. If you can't go like this, let me take a break. Let me sit in here defensively and think about what I want to do. Let me try this. That didn't work. Let me try something else. If you can't sit and do that and then remember what worked and optimize on top of it, because you're tired, because you're discouraged, because you're scared, because you're insecure, because you didn't prepare. If you can't walk in every round of that fight, have your thinking ability, then you're just not going to win. Doesn't matter how smart you are. I see the best fighters in the world go in there unprepared for all the things we talked about, and they didn't preserve their ability to think under intense pressure. That pressure could come from your wife. That pressure could come from your family. That pressure could come from your boss, the people below you trying to overthrow you in a large corporation. It could come from anywhere, the bank, financing, COVID, all these things. You need to be able to think, and it's too late if you haven't prepared. So you got to be ready.
The same principles that define elite athletes also apply in business, in the courtroom, and everywhere in between. Mark Beaumont has pushed the limits of endurance over the past 2 decades. Among other world records, he remains the fastest person to have cycled around the planet, a journey that spanned 18,000 miles. We began our conversation by discussing the impetus behind Mark's obsession with adventure and his competitive drive.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Because I can look back from the first big chapter of my career was being an athlete and a broadcaster, but I also had these other interests. And it's very clear that ever since I cycled across Scotland when I was 12 years old, so what's that, like 25 years ago now, there's a chronology. It looks professional. It looks almost inevitable. It looks, things have got bigger and faster and better, and all these world records, taking me to 130 nations and territories now. But that's what life feels like when you look back on it. the way you live your life, it's scary. Yeah, there's uncertainty. You can only see the next horizon. And when I was a kid, I had such little perspective on what life could be. I was homeschooled until I was 12. So my two buddies were my two sisters. I lived on a hill farm in the foothills of Highlands of Scotland. So I'm sure your audience are just imagining like Braveheart and like wilderness. Well, it's not far off. It was kind of rural. So if you don't go to a playground, you don't socialize, you never go to clubs. Like I just didn't have that sort of framework. I didn't watch television. Quite an alternative upbringing. So when I then decided, I guess what I did have from a very, very early age was a real sense of self and independence, because guess what? I was working on the farm. I had a great work ethic because I was out there grafting every day. There was 60 goats to milk. There was 13 horses to muck out. There was 200 laying hens to collect the eggs from. There was a farm to run. So I spent most of my time being physical and being outside. Yeah, I didn't mind my own company. So when I decided to cycle across Scotland at the age of 12, it didn't seem that crazy. And you can kind of see how over the years, these ambitions got bigger and bigger. And when I left university at the age of 22, I cycled around the planet the first time. That's an 18,000 mile race. I've been doing it professionally ever since. But that's hindsight for you. The way I lived life, like everyone, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I was making it up.
What about the first time you got on a bike? Like, did you have any sense of just feeling like, hey, this is a good fit, I'm pretty good at this? Like, what was your experience right out of the gate?
I wasn't trying to compete with my friends because my sisters were my friends. I didn't have that social construct. I was never coached. I was never in a club. I wasn't trained in a normal sense. Most professional bike riders come up through the system. There was no system. My main passion was horse riding because my mum was big in the horse world. I was pretty close to the ski slopes, so skiing was another big passion of mine. Adventure sport for me was more about wild places and journeys than it was about performance. For most of my life, all the wild man experiences have simply been using my physical ability to get places. Whether that was a boat or swimming, or it was never really about beating anyone. It was always just about how to efficiently cross landscapes. And I've taken that to the extreme by breaking the world record for the length of Africa, going from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, climbing the highest peaks in the Americas. I've taken it to the extreme for sure. But for me, it was more about great journeys than about being a performance athlete. So was it a good fit? I guess I was physically able. I'm quite a big guy. I'm tall for a bike rider. I was never playing soccer or I was never playing hockey. I'd never really built that side of my athletic career. Whereas climb a mountain, run a marathon, cycle across a continent, I was always good at that stuff, but more because of the wanderlust of travel.
In 2008, as many know, like you broke the world record for a circumnavigational bike ride. So basically a trip around the world. So basically 18,000 miles. And I believe the record prior to this was around, I think, 276 days or so. You broke the record, almost 100 days. You got it in 194. I imagine you trained for this, but what did that training look like, just leading up to it?
Well, I know you're a bike rider, and it's interesting when you look back to your early days. Like, I thought I was being professional. I thought I knew my stuff. I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue. My bike didn't fit properly. I got tendinitis because, I wasn't set up right. I would just go out and do massive rides thinking that was good training, whereas, clearly you need to train smart, not just train long. And I was never giving myself time off, so I was overtraining. I was a kid, and you can make mistakes and get away with it when you're that age. When you're 38, you got to be a bit more structured about these things. But it's interesting when it comes to endurance because so many athletes don't really come into their own until their 30s and 40s because it's about the psychology, the experience, as much as it is the raw physicality. If it's about being a crit racer or a tour rider, for sure, you need to have that raw power and maybe youth on your side. Endurance, ultra endurance, adventure, anyone could do that. Young, old, male, female. It's more about your life experience, your resilience, your ability to suffer, sleep deprivation, the overall toolkit, as well as that physicality. And it's not about how good am I today, but how good am I tomorrow, the next day, next week, next month. Just that ruthless consistency to perform. But riding around the planet the first time was just awesome. As I said before, I've been fortunate enough to go on professional expeditions now for over 15 years, but I'll never replicate the raw emotions and the excitement of the first time. The first time just being out there, being so scared. The more you go on in life, the more you know, and you look for that rawness, but you kind of know too much. And it was pre-social media as well. So I was out there with a camera filming it at arm's length. It makes me feel very old, but Twitter and Facebook, it just wasn't a thing 15 years ago. And so I was capturing this journey for the BBC in the UK, and I would just sit in my tent at the end of a long day and just chat to that camera for half an hour. It was my buddy on the road. So it wasn't just the bike race, but it was also the opportunity to share it with an audience. And that's what really launched my career, capturing the journey.
Now, I know there's the things that you could obviously control, which is like your effort, for example, the planning you did in advance of this. But during this ride, even in 2008, you encountered, a great deal of adversity too. I mean, I remember reading about like in Louisiana and so on, you were involved in a car crash and then you got robbed later the same day. I mean, if you could speak to some of that.
You're not a million miles from there right now, are you? You're a little bit further east. I was so excited by that point. I'd cleared Texas. I got to the Louisiana and I thought, hey, I'm done. I'm across the US and I'm in the last 3,000 miles. I've got a record in the bag. And then I had one of the worst days I've ever had on a bike where I got hit by a car at crossroads, buckled the front end of the bike. I was pretty smashed. I broke the windscreen of the car. And then that evening in the town of Lafayette, trying to get things sorted, I was mugged. So you imagine getting in a car crash at lunchtime and then mugged that evening. That was a bad day. I tell you what, equal and opposite. There was a lot of friendship of strangers. People really looked after me after that. So I don't want to be down on the good people of Louisiana here. It was just a bad day and a run of bad luck. But these things can happen at any time. I've been in more tight corners than most. I've been in some really dangerous situations where I nearly lost my life. I've seen people pay that ultimate price. It's not about whether stuff will go wrong in life, but it's how you react.
And not to mention also, I think you also struggle with like dysentery during this ride. I know now you're talking about these things looking back, right? Obviously you got through them and so on, but I imagine at the young age of 22 with so many unknowns and so on, like were there any times during this ride that you thought about essentially just giving up?
I think when you're at your lowest ebb on an expedition, and I guess I've done this so many times, when you end up in a really, really tough spot where rationally you should give up, you could give up. Dysentery is a great example. If anyone's like had serious D&V before, it's like been seriously unwell, by the time you get into those places, you're normally so fighting. You're fighting not to get to the finish line and the big dream of the record, but you're fighting against stopping. Momentum is your greatest friend. So you don't have the perspective of, oh, should I give up? Should I quit? Is this that moment where I'm at that crossroads? It's not a moment in time when you're thrown into. There's normally a journey to get you to those really hard places. And so when you're there, you're just fighting. It's interesting when you look back on them, you go, how did I do that? Like, how did I keep going in that extraordinarily difficult situation? And the reality is you've just got a different perspective. The only thing worse than going slowly is stopping. And when you're struggling to find momentum in your project, whether that's, a big expedition ride or whatever you're doing in life, the fear of failure. I'm not like some super inspired person. Take my second around the world in 80 days, which was, much, much, much faster, riding 240 miles a day. I was out my bed at 3:30 every morning, on the bike at 4, every single day for 2.5 months, riding, 240 miles. I'm not an inspired person at 3:30 in the morning. I'm not somebody that I'm just freakishly positive, but I'm accountable. Tell me the consequence of failing. If I fail, everyone fails. And I've got a big team working for me. And these are expensive projects. So it's interesting, don't give me some motivational speech or high fives. I just don't work that way. I just think we've all got mental health and you've got to call a bad day bad. You've got to call a good day good. And you've got to look back on your successes and sort of have pride in how you fought. But when you're in it, you've got to call it what it is. And there's no point in sugarcoating stuff and saying, oh, it's all about positivity and being motivated. Well, guess what? Some days you're not motivated and you've still got to get the job done.
And on those days, what keeps you going?
If the sum total of my ambition was to pay the mortgage and, have a pension pot, I clearly wouldn't have lived the life that I've lived. I've done difficult things for a living. I'm scared of existing. I'm scared of just, not for the fame okay, I've got a profile over here in the UK, but like not for the fame of it, the business you can make out of it. I think I'm what I'm most intimidated by. Maybe it comes from my formative years of being homeschooled and then, having a tough time in high school, but I don't like the idea of just being a number. And that's not an ego statement. I like making time count. I like doing significant stuff for my own sense of purpose and impact in the world with my friends, with my family, my community, my work. I like to create stuff which, really punctuates time. What's the point in life? It's about creating memories. So the thing that scares me most is just existing. And I know that's a bit probably too broad reaching, but it's the only way I can answer that question.
How much of this did you learn about yourself just through these rides? How much of that self-awareness did you have before you went on these long rides to then actually learning this through through that process, that experience?
I guess it's a combination of the above. The formative years matter. You've got to have a sense of independence to be able to do these things. I think living life with one eye in the mirror is a pretty good metaphor for the fact that you're out there, you're interacting, you're trying to do stuff, but you've got to have the self-awareness to go, why would I care? What does it matter? What am I trying to do here? That sort of intrinsic motivation that you're talking about there, nature, nurture. I look at my kids. I've got a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, 2 daughters, and they're totally different existence to mine. We live in a city. They're super sociable. They don't have the same environment that they're growing up in. But the only thing I hope that I can give them is a sense of independence. I think it's really, really important to be able to assimilate and, fit in. But the independence of mind to do things you're passionate about. It's interesting because that independence often gets squeezed out of kids at school, whereas it becomes your greatest superpower in adult life. I work with people my age and older who still act like they're in a playground. If everyone's wearing brown shoes, they want to wear brown shoes. And I'm like, well, if you want to wear black shoes or pink shoes, wear pink shoes. And I think that ability to not care too much, you're not being disruptive and being a maverick for the sake of it. If you have sort of a strong North Star in terms of what you believe is important, to not care too much if other people don't agree with you.
Our next game changer, Matt Fraser, is one of the most dominant athletes on the planet. He won the CrossFit Games 5 consecutive years in a row, setting record upon record and earning the title of the fittest man on earth. But before all the podiums, what got Matt into CrossFit in the first place?
When I was training at the Olympic Education Center, it's in northern Michigan, Marquette, Michigan. It's usually the feeder system into the Olympic Training Center. So the Olympic Training Center, all you do is train. That's it. That's your only requirement. The Olympic Education Center, you're required to carry a full course load in school and train. And so, I was there, but I knew I wanted to do mechanical engineering, and that school didn't have it. They had engineering technician. So all I did was take math and physics. The stuff that I knew, all right, when I transfer out of the school, it's going to transfer over to whatever school I end up at. And then right at the end of it, the funding for the Olympic Education Center got cut. And so, I have a talk with my parents, and they're like, hey, you can either take out student loans or you can move back to Vermont and go to UVM, because my mom worked at the university. And so I got tuition remission. So that was an easy decision, like either go in debt or just move to a way better school that has the degree that I'm going after for free. So I did that. And, this is after I've already retired from weightlifting. So now I'm just focused on school. I did a double major. I did mechanical engineering, and then I did a management degree, a minor in math and a minor in business, and had no intentions of doing anything weightlifting oriented or athletic, anything. It was just like, nope, I'm focused on school now. And I'm probably 4 or 5 years behind all my peers because I put life on hold for my weightlifting career. So I'm a little bit older than everyone in class. I don't have the same interests as anyone. So it was just lonely. I didn't feel like I fit in. I just worked my ass off in school. And I think all it was I just kind of gained the freshman 15. And I was not happy with where I was in life. So, just eating for pleasure, as dumb as that sounds. But I just started gaining weight. I went from working out twice a day for years to nothing. I didn't have the physique I used to have, but I didn't have the direction or the drive or the outlet. So I just figured, okay, I need to start doing something physical. And so I just looked up CrossFit near me. And I lived in Colchester, Vermont, and there was one in Williston. And so for Olympic weightlifters, that CrossFits have the equipment you need. to try to find an Olympic weightlifting gym in the US, there's a dozen in the country, but a CrossFit gym, they're on every corner. And so I just walked in and I was like, hey, can I use your barbells and plates? I have no interest in doing CrossFit. I just want to work out. I'll stay in the back corner. I won't interrupt anyone. And they're like, yeah, have at it. Do whatever you want. And so I just was going into the CrossFit gym just to do Olympic weightlifting. And one of the girls that trained, she was a competitor. She was always trying to coerce me into doing CrossFit workouts. And so, it started out with CrossFit workout that was just Olympic weightlifting. It was like 30 reps for time. And I would do it and I'm like, is that good? Is that bad? How does my score chalk up? And the owner of the gym, I think, saw the potential in me and he signed me up for my first competition. So I did it. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to do. I'm having to ask him to coach me through everything. And I ended up winning the competition and I made a couple $100. The prize was a couple $100 cash. And I just went, oh, for a full-time college student, a couple $100 goes a long way. And so I was like, hey, are there more competitions like this? Is this a normal thing? And they're like, yeah, you can hit one every weekend if you want. And I was like, all right, instead of getting a part-time job or something to have some walking around money, I'll just compete in CrossFit. And yeah, so it just started going around the local circuit. And I looked at it like a part-time job. I looked at it as like, all right, if I could pick up a couple $100 here, a couple grand there. For a broke college student, when you're eating ramen noodles and you want to go to a movie once a week, a couple $100 does the trick.
It's always been interesting to me because you made your debut first CrossFit Games in 2014, right? Finished second place and then second place in 2015. But how would you describe the difference between how you felt with each one? Because it seems like the 2015 one was the one that really pissed you off.
Yeah. It's kind of funny, exact same results, same competition, same placement, second place both times, but drastically different emotions tied to each medal. In 2014, it was my rookie year. I didn't know much about the sport. I wasn't dedicating much time to it. But the biggest thing was I had zero expectations going into it. So going in and getting second place, I'm doing backflips over. I can't believe how incredible this is. I'm on cloud 9 this whole time. And then first place guy is retiring. I'm in second place and I figure I'm a shoo-in. All I got to do is show up and I'm going to win it. And so, the whole year was just cut corners, bad diet, terrible sleep schedule, training inconsistently, not in a good mental headspace. And I show up and get the exact same results. And they just put me into a spiral. I left that competition not knowing if I ever wanted to do it again. I didn't even go into the gym for a couple months. I didn't know if I wanted to ante up again and put my chips in for another try, because then I was like, there's a real opportunity that I could dedicate years and years of my life to this and never succeed. Looking back now, I couldn't be more thankful for that second place finish, because it was the one that made me change my habits. If I had won in 2015 while eating terribly and not working hard and all these things, well, I would have continued those bad habits. I would have been rewarded for cutting corners and continued doing them. And then getting my ass kicked in 2015, it made me either shit or get off the pot, either dedicate yourself and give everything to this or go away. And thankfully I decided, okay, I'm going to do 1 year of dedication, because after the 2015, the part that was eating me alive was I didn't think second place was what I was capable of, but I knew it's what I deserved, because I left the competition thinking, what if my diet was better? What if I trained consistently? What if I was in a better, healthier relationship? All these what ifs. And so that's where it came from for 2016, was like, I'm not going to have a single what if. I'm going to set up my situations. If I show up in 2016 and get second place again, or if I get 10th place, there's no what ifs. It's what I deserve. And I hoped that was going to be enough to sleep well at night. Even if I don't win, the effort that I put in is going to be good enough for me to be proud of.
And when you came into that third games in 2016, like you said, it was the largest margin of victory in the history of the games. And then the following year, you got first place again with an even larger margin of victory. And then the following year, you did even better. So like, you're getting better every single year. And I imagine that's starting to dawn on people. But then 2019 comes around, and this was an interesting year, right? That I remember you faced a bit of adversity and questionable situation, right? But at the same time, it wasn't this huge margin of victory. You were almost coming from behind their entire games.
Yeah, 2019, there was a couple different factors that played into it. In 2019, they went with a format in the competition that it was just out of left field. Every year, they're changing the rules, they're changing the qualifying procedures, they're changing the scoring. It really puts you in a test of who can accept the things that they cannot change. What is the scoring system? Cool. I'm trying not to argue. I'm trying not to let it rent space in my head. I'm not listening to rumors. I wait until I hear the facts of what it is, and then I put my attack plan together. And so, they announced the scoring system and they're doing cuts throughout the week. After event 4, we're cutting down to the top 20 athletes. After event 5, we're cutting down to the top 10. There's nothing I can do about it. It's not an ideal. I don't think it worked well. I think it looked terrible. And I think it negatively affected the scoring in terms of you could afford a bad finish early on, and then you hope that your strength showed up later in the week. And it was a great mental test of, this isn't what you want. This isn't ideal. This doesn't work well for you, but you don't have a choice. Deal with it. So, there's a combination of the scoring system. I got hit with a pretty rough penalty early on that stripped, I think it was like 30 or 40 points. A winning event is 100 points. So it was a pretty big hit. But then once again, by the end of the weekend, I was thankful it all happened, because the 3 years prior to that, when I've won, it was by a large margin of victory. And so people started thinking that, oh, he only competes well when he doesn't have any pressure. He doesn't do well under pressure. And I remember hearing people say these things and telling them, just because you've never seen me compete under pressure doesn't mean I'm not good at it. Be better. Put me under pressure. And so then it happened. I remember the specific event. I remember where I was standing. I remember everything about that. And I was down by 50 points. And I had a great opportunity to gain a large chunk of those points back. And all I heard was the criticisms. All I was hearing was the commentators, the other competitors saying that I don't do well under pressure. I remember telling myself, like, all right, good. They say you don't do well under pressure. Let's show them. Let's shut them up. This is an opportunity that you haven't been put in before. Let's rise to the occasion. And it's a very freeing feeling having your back against the wall, because you're already failing. So it's like, you can't get worse. Just swing for the fences and try to connect and knock it over the fence. A moment like that was great, because then it was an opportunity, the last weakness that people have seen in me. This is the one situation that I haven't been in. I get to prove it to everyone that, I'm good at this too. That one worked out. In some ways it was stressful. In some ways it was very freeing of, there's no pressure on me. I'm in second place. All I can do is go up. So it was nice leaving that competition knowing that, like, okay, I don't have to be in the lead going into the final event. I don't have to be in the lead by 100 points to win or perform. I can do that too.
So Matt, you win the CrossFit Games 5 years in a row, widely considered the most dominant athlete ever in the sport. You weren't just winning, you were dominating. And the most impressive thing to me is that these are elite athletes. These are some of the top athletes in the world, and you're not beating them by a narrow margin. You're dominating. I'm curious, why do you think you had such dominance in CrossFit? Like, what do you believe that you were doing differently?
I don't think it can boil down to any one thing. I think there was a whole laundry list of things that I was doing, and no single one of them on their own would probably be a noticeable difference. But, you start accumulating 20, 30, 40 of these different habits over years and years. Now they start to compound. Now they're adding up. It all came from a coach that I had early on told me, like, your training's not special. Everyone is doing what you're doing in the gym. At first, I took that as, well, no, I thought what I was doing in the gym was special. And he's like, no, everyone's doing hard rowing intervals. Everyone's squatting heavy. Everyone's doing everything you're doing. You need to find the 1% gains elsewhere that they're not doing. Trying to find those little areas of, like, all right, the best recovery tool that has ever existed is sleep. It's so simple, but so many people take it for granted. They don't execute on it as well as they should. So I was like, okay, not only am I going to take my sleep very seriously, but how can I make it a little bit better than everyone else's? So, setting up my room to be basically like an incubator of the perfect temperature, the perfect light, the perfect mattress, the perfect everything, the warm-ups, the cool downs in training, the time in between training, how I'm fueling myself in between training sessions, during training sessions, setting up my life so that I have zero stress. I don't think about anything business-wise. I don't think about anything outside of the gym. So, whether that's surrounding myself with the right people that are willing to take those things off my plate or setting them up so they're a non-factor in my life. It's countless things like that where, yeah, if you do one of those things for one day, you're going to notice no difference. One of those things over an entire year, yeah, you might notice a little something. You can't say it's definitive, but you're doing 30 or 40 of these things over multiple years. That's where you're setting records. And even stuff as foolish as I use a box cutter every day to open packages. And then the 3 weeks before competition, I don't use a box cutter anymore. Because what if 2 weeks before the games, I cut my thumb? Everything we do with the barbell, we use a hook grip. If I have a big slice in my thumb, I can't hook grip as comfortably, or the blood's going to make the bar slippery. Things as foolish sounding as that. It's that 1 in a million chance, but I'm not willing to take that chance. A big thing was having a home life that was stress-free and ideal to cater to this crazy lifestyle. Wake up, eat, sleep, train, and that's it. So I have a manager that deals all the business stuff. I have the fiance that deals with everything in my personal life, so that I woke up with one goal and one goal only, and that was to be the best competitor there ever was.
A clear vision and a relentless, no excuses commitment are among the keys to elite level performance and are what differentiates the good from the great. James Lawrence, also known as the Iron Cowboy, is an extreme endurance athlete who's regarded by many as the toughest man alive. After completing 50 Ironman-length triathlons in 50 consecutive days in 50 states, James upped the ante, completing 101 Ironmans in 101 consecutive days. What could possibly possess someone to do such a thing?
It's interesting you say that and have that perception because it's so true. I mentioned earlier, we speak for a living. That's how I feed my family, is through speaking and coaching. Trust me, I don't get paid to suffer. Nobody's paying us to do that. But the reality is it's all perspective based on where you are in your life, right? And so I knew we were in the heavy stages of preparation for the 100, but nobody knew about it because we hadn't made the announcement. And then I was speaking to audiences about the 50. And in my head, I was like, it was almost laughable because they obviously thought it was a big deal, and it is a big deal, but it's from their perception, right? Just looking at raw numbers, right? The 50 was a 7-week campaign to cover 7,000 miles. And that's insane for the person that's coming off the couch or that's done one Ironman or anything like that. But being the person in the driving seat that has a decade worth of experience, and now you're staring down the barrel of a 14-week campaign that's 14,000 plus miles, yes, it becomes laughable, but that's the beautiful part, right? When you're in the middle of something and you're pushing your limits wherever you are, it should be hard. You should be pushing it. And then success happens and you look back and you grow and more becomes. It's like super, super hard math. When you're in 5th grade, you can't really conceptualize really, really hard math. When you're doing 5th grade math in 5th grade, holy hell, that's the hardest. That is so damn hard. But now when you learn how to do calculus, when you're doing calculus, like 5th grade math is pretty damn laughable, right? And so it's all based on where you are on your journey and what experience and stepping stones you've successfully navigated through. If you don't have those stepping stones, you're setting yourself up for a disaster to happen.
So what does the preparation look like mentally, physically, when you're about to embark on something like this? Even going back to like the 50 Ironmans, 50 days in 50 states, what did that, like, even physical preparation look like, mental preparation?
Yeah, you can't prepare for a 50-day challenge, a 100-day challenge. You just try to get in the best possible shape, the most durable physique that you can. It's a battle of attrition. You have to learn how to eat on the move. You got to figure out how to consume that amount of calories while moving, while breaking your body down. You have to teach your body to continue to perform under duress, under injury. So the preparation is a lot of swimming, a lot of running, a lot of biking, a lot of strength training. But the mental side of stuff, it's a lifetime piece of work. To me, I look back at my entire life, and my mental training started as a younger kid in athletics, and then went into wrestling, and then went into trying to figure out the sport of golf, and then triathlon. These are all individual sports that whether you win or you lose, it's your fault. It's my choice to come back and work on this craft and get better at it. And okay, this is where my weakness is. How do I become a more well-rounded athlete? And so really the mental side of stuff, I didn't do a lot of preparation going into the 100, like as far as specific prep. It's because I've been building and flexing that muscle for a very long time. And now it becomes, okay, when the time comes, I now have the experience just to tap into that. And I'm going to continue to grow that muscle even during the experience. And it was pushed to the max during the 100 because it's a long, long journey. And we had to stay mentally tough for a quarter of a year. And you get into a protective state to where your mind is so powerful that it's protecting you from feeling everything that you're doing. And it is almost like you're in a traumatic state. And then your brain is just like, I'm going to protect you. And then I know we're going to talk about it, what happens after that you come out of that state, after something like this, a big goal in your life happens. How do you deal with that letdown, that come down, or the aftermath?
So every day that you're doing this, whether it's the swim, the bike, or the run, like what are you thinking about while you're doing it? I'm just curious. On like a 112-mile bike ride every single day, are you listening to music? Is there something that are you meditating? Like how do you get through each one?
Many different things. One, daydreaming. I think daydreaming is super important. You go through phases of that. You go through education or learning, listening to a podcast. You go through just mindless energy bump of music. And sometimes you just want to quiet, and then you're starting to plan your future. You're going through your past. I mean, your mind can do a lot of different things. And for me, the biggest thing was I used, especially that bike portion, an opportunity to multitask and use and strengthen my mind and educate myself. I listened to a podcast or two every single day, and just tried to learn while I was out there. I'm sitting here anyways, unconsciously, consciously, turning the wheels over. I know how to do this. Let's just see if I can occupy my mind so that it can get through it. And you can't look too far ahead, right? When you're on day 15, you're broken. You can't say, oh, I only have 85 more to go. It's just your brain will collapse on itself. And so you just really have to learn how to occupy your mind in the moment so that you are ever present all the time. And once you figure out how to be right there in that moment and you take care of that moment, everything in the future has to take care of itself because you're always in that space.
And how many times do you think about giving up? Like on, I guess as a percentage of the number of days that you're doing this, like, is this something that, once a week, or only towards the tail end, or is this happening more frequently?
It's not a question of or thought of I'm going to give up. It's like, how much longer do I have to endure? And so it was never a question of I'm going to give up. It's how do I manage or how do I cope, right? It was more figuring that out, because as soon as you start to go down the path of darkness and the thoughts come in and, okay, I'm going to give up, you're going to come up with a reason to validate that thought process. You want to avoid that at all costs, because that's a slippery slope. Because as soon as you start going down that road, and that's why it's so important to put an unbelievable team around you that can kind of tell when you're wavering, when you're faltering, when you're struggling. And I'm not saying you're not going to struggle or waver on the journey that you're on, because you are, because we are human and it's just a natural part of the growth process. Like, you're going to struggle, you're going to question. And that's why you have to have a really good reason why you're doing things. You have to have a great center or team around you. Your ethos has to be super strong, and that's the reason why you're doing what you're doing. And if you have a really strong ethos, you can always revert back to that and say, okay, if these are the things that I truly believe in to my core, will this decision I'm about to make align with that core belief system? And so before anybody starts any big project, I think you should really sit down and figure out, okay, what's my ethos? What's my core values? What do I stand for? And then really commit and buy into those statements. And then every question you have on a tough journey becomes very easy to answer, because you just revert back to what my ethos and what I stand for is. Because you will not make rational decisions when you're broken mentally, physically, when you're fatigued. And you have to say, okay, I'm not of sound mind. What was my core values and system when I was in a sound mind, and revert back to that. That's the easiest way to make decisions in a tough moment.
And during all of this, I'm just curious, how's it been for your family? I mean, I know they've been very supportive, but have there been times when they're like, James, like, you don't have to do this? And, has it been tough on them?
It's been tough on them, but it's also been a blessing on them. It gives us a lifestyle that we want. And ultimately, it helps them all grow mentally in their own ways, because we all had different roles on the journeys. My wife plays a very different role than I do. We communicate what those roles are. And just like it's hard for me physically and mentally, it's hard for her emotionally and mentally to do that thing and to support me in what I'm doing. We play very different but important roles. And I think she's an amazing guest on podcasts as well, because she provides a very different perspective than what I provide, even though it was the same journey. And my kids the same way. I mean, we didn't just win the kid lottery. I mean, they are exceptional kids because of the examples that Sonny and I try to set and the high level that we go through and the lessons that they learn through the adversity and the hardship. They fully embrace it, and they recognize that they're exceptional students and kids and everything because of the adversity that they've gone through with us as a family. And so, yeah, without a question, it's hard. But that's what develops and grows a society. And it's a huge problem of why we have so much softness and entitlement in the school systems and in the culture that we have surrounding us right now. It's a massive problem. There needs to be more struggle and adversity that is intentionally taken head on instead of running away from it.
I'm sure not everyone, you're not encouraging them to do 100 Ironman triathlons, but you are encouraging them to do difficult things and to go through periods of adversity. Why do you feel that's so important?
Well, take a look at the 2020 pandemic, for an example. You could take a look around and go, not handling it well, no experience mentally. They've never done anything hard in their lives. Handling it like a champ, let me look at their resume. Okay, they've done some significant things in their life. They were ready for a moment like this. Just to be ready for the unpredictable nature of life, it's important to take ourselves, our minds, our bodies, to be physically fit, to be mentally healthy, to be emotionally strong for when something like 2020 happens. That was unprecedented. But I'm telling you, everybody could take a step back right now and they could go, okay, handled well, didn't handled well, dumpster fire, train wreck, incredible outcome, all these things. And everybody experienced the same epidemic, but we all experienced it in a different, unique way to ourselves. And I'm not demeaning anybody's struggles or their capacity to. I'm saying from an observatory standpoint, it was very interesting to see the way some people handled it versus some people that maybe didn't handle it very well. And I could probably draw a pretty good correlation between that and their previous experience doing intentionally hard things, because everybody's heart is different, right? We're all born with a certain baseline, but I believe it's our responsibility not only to feed our bodies, to be healthy, to be active, but to do the same thing with our minds, to be active and healthy. Well, in order for our bodies to be healthy, we have to stress them. Same thing with our minds. You have to stress your mind in order for it to be a healthy, functioning part of who we are. The easy road is not the always the best way to go. My wife always says, look, if I've got two paths, I always intentionally choose the harder one because I want to continually challenge my mindset and my growth. I look at that as incredibly inspirational and a good motivator for me to be that same example. Like, okay, look, I've got two ways to go here. This one's going to challenge me a little bit more. I think I'm going to intentionally choose that route so that I can develop and grow and progress.
And coming back to like the 100, it actually was the 101. Like, I guess, could you talk me through like what was the reason why you added on that extra day after finishing the 100?
Yeah. It was a decision that wasn't made at the beginning. It was a decision that was made 3-4 days before the actual 100. And I just kept getting the feeling. I do a lot of things off of how I feel, gut feeling, emotion, inspiration. And I just kept getting the feeling you have to do one more. You can't just teach a principle. You have to be the example. The reality is everybody struggles. We all have moments where we feel like we're completely broken, where we're backed into a corner, where we cannot conceptualize getting up and facing the day, facing our challengers, facing the adversity. It's just too much. I felt I would be a hypocrite if I didn't get up when I was broken, exhausted, when the goal was achieved, to not go do one more. Because the reality is I promise you, no matter where you are, what you're doing, if you're broken, you're defeated, you can get up and do one more. And I don't know how many times you're going to have to get up and do one more. And sometimes you're going to have to get up and do one more alone. I promise you can do it. And I felt I had to do it myself if I wanted to be a person that would eventually want to talk about, look, you've all got one more in you. You can do one more rep. I felt I had to do it in order to be warranted to be able to speak about it.
I hope you enjoyed revisiting this episode of the Game Changing Attorney Podcast with our guests, George, Mark, Matt, and James, and have gained new insights from our timeless conversation. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that I can help you grow your law firm. Number 1, download the first chapter of my book absolutely free at GameChangingAttorney.com. Number 2, you can shoot me a text at 404-531-7691 and I'll answer any question that you've got for me. And finally, number 3, if you can leave this podcast a 5-star review, it'll help us gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons learned here to you. For more information on this episode, see the show notes for this episode in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.